Yeah.
James, thank you for taking time out. I know you're a busy man. And, what we're trying to do with this platform is to say that we believe that if you want to get to the net zero pathway, you take businesses with you. But I want to start with something very simple. What does net zero mean to you? Because there are lots of different definitions. How do you see it?
Well, thanks, Sumit, for inviting me to talk.
My pleasure.
It's great to be having this conversation with you. I've been thinking about this quite a lot. I think the first thing to say about net zero is it's a really important aspirational target, because it's so much better than saying we're going to reduce emissions by 80%, because we have to get to that end point of net zero. You can't leave the really difficult bits for future years. So the whole transformation that we're undertaking has to get us to that net zero point. I think the second thing to say is there's lots of different ways of getting there. Clearly, we've got to decarbonise electricity production and the grid, and that's going to be a very important part of it. But electrification is only, 20% of emissions? So we've got to think about the rest of the emissions that we produce. And the thing that we focus on here and in the Circular London programme is consumption-based emissions. And how are we going to reduce consumption-based emissions? So that's everything that we consume, from food to clothes to plastics to the built environment. We've got to find a way of decarbonising. And that means that not only are we going to have to produce these better, we're going to have to use them in a different way. And the thing that we subscribe to in the circular economy is, reusing, reducing, repairing, and recycling. And recycling is the sort of action of last resort. And we make these products and services go round the system in perpetuity. And that will help us to get to that net zero position, because we'll have a closed loop of the activities that are undertaken.
Because there is a definition that's been on, you've been in many different visors, we've known each other for years, and you've seen the progression here. There was a way of doing it, which is, I'm going to burn loads of stuff, I'm going to plant a bunch of trees, I'm going to offset. I think that conversation is sort of dying or going. Yes, there is an element of offsetting, which is always great, but the whole thing is this, as you say, the circular, the life of how much carbon is in something, from the clothes we're wearing to, the computers we have. And we've had, I'm pretty old. I think you and I are probably similar age. People used to repair things, right? Your telly didn't work, you took it to a bloke who repaired it. You hoovered it now, you just get rid of it. Your car used to be fixed by people yourselves. You'd have a go and tinker. So is there a thing now where we've actually created a business model where we have a society built on waste? We use and then we discard. We don't go and say, how can we improve the lifespan of something?
Well, that's completely the definition of the linear economy, which we're currently locked into. And we're starting to change that, and we're starting to make the case for the benefits that come from repairing, both from an economic perspective, the life cycle cost of these products becomes less, but also the quality and the type of jobs that are produced, because artisan repairers is a skill in its own right. And getting people skilled up to do those sorts of things creates good jobs. And they also are local and in the local community, because you have to have a point of contact that you deliver these to. So we can see all kinds of benefits from the decarbonisation and the reduced emissions point of view, through to the better jobs, from the greater engagement in communities and the way in which communities rebuild themselves, to the redefinition of the high street. And I think that's really exciting. And I think we should look at those opportunities and think about how businesses can create the business and models of the future that enable that to happen.
This is all about waste, okay? We're here, you deal with the waste of London, you work with the authorities in the GLA. Why do we have such a problem with waste? Because we've all sort of over the last few years gone, we're going to recycle, we're going to put these in the green box and these in the brown box, or whatever. And then you end up finding that a lot of it ends up still in landfill or being incinerated. We still have a big issue, don't we?
Well, waste is complicated. I mean, there's lots of different types of waste, and we're also looking at dealing with it in the most efficient way possible. So you're trying to create scale so that you can do these things cost effectively and efficiently. And I think also we've got a whole series of behaviours that have become adopted over a period of time. And what we're starting to see is a shift in those behaviours, and some of the work that we're doing around, for example, Love Not Landfill, which is about textiles recycling, is starting to change people's behaviours, making them more aware of fast fashion and its impact on the environment, and giving them ways of recycling those clothes so that they can be more environmentally conscious and deal with it in a more sustainable way. But the other thing I think is important to realise is there's so many different streams of waste.
Yeah, from paper to the plastic. There's so much, isn't there?
Yeah, exactly. And if you look at food waste, for example, according to the C40 report, it's 13% of emissions in London. It's around 14 million tonnes of the 110 million tonnes of total emissions. And food waste, roughly a third of food is wasted. So if you reduce food waste, you reduce emissions. And then if you think about how you're going to separate the food waste that remains from the other waste streams, you can actually then put it into anaerobic digestion and composting, which is a much more environmentally sustainable way of dealing with food waste. So, we're doing a lot of things to enable that to happen. We're a flagship food city with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, working in Sao Paulo and New York, and that's really focusing on how to deal with food in a more sustainable way.
So what are you trying to do? What's the aim of trying to create a circular economy here and now? What are you trying to do? You're going to talk to businesses and councils and us as individuals, and am I going to get like different information of what I should do? What's the ultimate goal here?
So the three main actors in this, there's the government, and that's central government, which has certain policy aspects that it does. The Greater London Authority, which also sets environmental strategy and planning. And then you've got the local authorities, which are implementing on the ground. And they are committed to reducing waste by adopting circular economy principles. And the ambition that the Mayor has is to make London the world's leading low-carbon circular city. So that's the public side of things. The second aspect that you've got is the citizen. And really helping the citizen to make better decisions by nudging them into changed behaviours. And that's informing them better of ways of doing things so that they can have less of an impact on the environment and they can live a more circular life, and rewarding people when they do really great things. And then the third element, which is really exciting element, I think, for new business models and new ways of doing things, is business. And we're seeing small, medium-sized enterprises coming forward with some fantastic ideas to create these new repair and reuse, different types of products that are far more circular. And here in our Circular London programme, we've advised 160 of those businesses to help them get set up and get underway, and to really take advantage of that opportunity of both becoming more circular and creating the circular business models of the future.
You may not have the figures down, but roughly, do you know how much waste is recycled in London? Because the definition of recycling is very interesting, because is recycling us taking stuff to the tip? So I've done my bit. I haven't thrown it in the rubbish, I put it to the tip. Or is recycling actually how much comes back into society? Because my definition seems to be that recycling is we take stuff and we either incinerate it, either put it in landfill, or we gather what we can and then reuse in another product. So that's how I see recycling. How much, roughly, if you have an idea, and what is recycling to you?
So
as an
at the consumer level, we have around a third of materials are recycled.
That's more than I thought. Actually.
Yeah, and it's this is very well measured, and it's reported on an annual basis and tracked and monitored closely, borough by borough. So there's a rigorous evaluation process, and we're seeing it's improved over a period of time. It's now starting to stagnate a little bit. I mean, London has been doing better than most places, but we need to get to a much higher level of performance. Overall, the target for total recycling across London is 65%.
Right.
And that includes households, which is about a third, and commercial, which is actually quite a bit higher. Right. So I think it's about 45%. So we've still got a way to go to get up to this 65% target that we have. And it'll be driven in part by much higher increase in commercial recycling, and obviously the shift we're making in the household recycling as well.
Is recycling turning it into another product, in your view? or is recycling just putting it to use? So it could be energy, waste from it becomes energy, and that's a use. How do you see it yourself?
Well, so really it's the stream that these products go into. And you know, most people have a bin which has multiple recycling products, and again sorted, and these waste streams are separated. You know, some of it plastic, and some of it card and paper. You know, card and paper is relatively easy to recycle, and the recycling rate for card and paper is pretty high. Plastics, you know, you've got to separate. There's also separation of different types of plastics as well, and you end up with different quality at the end of that process. And that's really another challenge: is how do we raise the quality of what comes out of these recycling processes so that you can reuse some of that material. And you see a lot of businesses are putting targets that they're going to use recycled materials in their products.
Correct. Yeah.
But you need access to a high quality feedstock. So, you know, these are all challenges that we're facing, and the solutions that we're starting to drive through, you know, the work with the boroughs, but also, you know, businesses coming in and starting to do things in a different way and to be really innovative about it.
That's what the point of this platform is. It's all about how business can do it. And what do you think the opportunity there? You just explained plastic. So if you took the plastic from this office here and it goes into a recycling place, there'll be a variety of different plastics. Are you saying there's actually money to be made by companies that can go, I can take that, find a technological solution to sort it into the best kind of feedstock that then makes the next set of chairs that we use, or the next kind of you know, tables that we have? You think there's opportunities there?
Yeah, well, in this office we've got furniture made of recycled plastics, and we've got furniture also made of recycled glass as well. So, you know, there are those products available, but it all depends on the quality of the waste stream. So if you can get high quality waste streams, you can repurpose these materials, and you can do some really interesting and innovative design ideas that enable them to be more circular. If you don't get that quality, then you're left with materials that are much more difficult to reuse. So that's really, you know, the objective.
And there's an economic comment. It's not worth it because the feedstock isn't good enough. So and the cost is it. Yeah. What's the view about the lever, right? So you'd say there's two things, you know, do I recycle because I've got the choice of bins because my council given it, or will I recycle because I'm going to get fined? You know, the push-pull argument. You said earlier in this interview, you said we need to nudge people. That doesn't sound like you think sort of strong regulation is where we need to go to force us to do these things, otherwise we get fined, or force us to do, as a business, to recycle. What do you think about that behavioural thing? Because that's the killer element, isn't it?
I think you've got to make people aware of what they need to do, and then you've got to make it easy for them to do it as well. And then you've got to sort of let them know when they're doing it well and when they're not doing it so well. And I think...
so it should be some regulation?
Well, you have to have a system, and the system is the thing that enables it to work. And the system is a combination of processes, behaviours and regulation, and you want to optimise that in a way that, you know, makes people want to do it, because if people want to do it, they'll do it better than if they have to do it. So, you know, that's the balance that we're trying to strike around this, in a way that, you know, individual boroughs have their own ways of doing it, and that's part of their democratically elected mandate, because people care about waste and they care about how it's done. So, you know, there's no sort of right answer about that. I think is you've got to get the balance right, and you've got to get it right for the communities with which you're working.
Moving forward, as we look over the next sort of decade, you know, here we are in the capital city of this country, and it's happening in Manchester, in Leeds, and all that. The shift towards electric cars, the shift towards us being aware. Is there a shift that we're probably not doing enough of, which is the consumerism side in the first place? As you said, do we buy too many things that are fast fashion? Do we, you know, renew our cars too often? Do we buy clothes? Do we use, you know, upgrade our phones and laptops? You know, before we even get to that point of, do we need to use it? It's that classic thing in energy, you know, the megawatt you save is the one where you never used it in the first place. Is there a real problem how we get into our heads? Because it fights against in human nature, which is denial. I don't want to be denied something. even if I know that actually I use it, it's not that great for
Yeah.
the planet. How do you envisage us tackling that thing of changing the way we are, the way that, years ago it was fashionable to smoke,
Yeah.
and now it isn't?
Yeah. Well, I think technology helps us here.
Right.
So, we now have a phone. We don't have a newspaper delivered every day, and we get our media through that. And that's a whole sort of shift in the way in which we use resources.
Yeah.
I think there's also a recognition that there's enormous intrinsic value in a lot of these products, whether it's electrical waste or telephones. So, you really want to take them back and you want to use the valuable materials that are in them. And everybody's sort of incentivized to do that in quite a good way. I think as you look at the kind of underlying data, the consumption-based emissions that are included in the things that we do and the purchases that we make, people become more informed about whether they need to do those things.
Should we have a label when we go and buy a good, say, this used this much carbon?
Yeah,
do you think that would be a good thing?
Some products do.
Like a kind of, like the food one, was the green, yellow, red signals.
And all of your appliances have a rating on them. What would you do in clothes, for example? Because different textiles have different embedded carbon, and they all have trade-offs in terms of how they're produced and where they come from. I think that's a little bit of a way away to get that real clarity and certainty around the footprint of every single product. But I think the general direction is the thing that enables us to think more shrewdly about how we do things and what we want to get out of the use of those things. And if you project yourself forward to the net zero world in 2050, it'll be very different in terms of what's being produced. It'll be much more of a service-oriented world than a product-oriented world. And you'll be thinking about reusing your materials and be in a more sophisticated way. You'll think about sharing we've got something called the Library of Things, which is starting to emerge, which is basically where you can borrow saws, drills, the sorts of things that you would purchase.
Why would I own it?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah, and there's some statistic about the average drill being used for 8 minutes in its lifetime or something like that.
Why am I definitely?
Yeah.
That's really interesting. You never think about that, do you? Really? And so, what I want to sort of wrap up with here is how important. You've worked in the consultancy field. You've worked with the World Bank. And at the end of the day, I kind of think that there has to be an economic driver, which makes the solutions. Do you think business has switched on to the opportunity? And do you believe we can solve this net zero crisis, whatever you want to call it, but getting to net zero? It can only be solved with business solutions.
Well, the first thing I would say is I completely agree that there's got to be an economic driver. We advocated and did a huge amount of work at the World Bank on putting a price on carbon, and you see, the price on carbon increasing in EU ETS, and you also see businesses using a shadow price of carbon, so they allocate their resources in a better and smarter way. So I completely buy on the pricing externality is a critical part of getting this right.
Yeah.
I think the other part of the question that you ask is the opportunities that it presents to business. Well, I think leaders are really going to do extraordinary things that change the way in which we operate, we function, and we consume their products. And Mark Carney talks about the tragedy of horizons. We now have this 2050 policy indicator, and finance is going to have to follow that. So where is your investment going to go? You're going to get much smarter asset and liability matching. My pension fund, why would I want something that's going to give me a liability 20 years out when I really want an opportunity and an asset? And those are the driving forces, I think, that will enable business to do really smart things and to innovate around this path to net zero. And we need to get behind those businesses that really want to do this and prepared to make that transition and support them. We can do things by making our investments in a smarter, more sustainable way, by buying products that are smarter and more sustainable, and supporting businesses that have got new and innovative business models that are going to drive that exciting future that we all have.
Finally, are you hopeful that we're on the right path? Because we got kids, right?
Yeah,
You've got
yeah.
kids, and are they going to be in a different world to how we grew
Yeah.
up? And their idea of throwing things away will be different.
Yeah.
And what do you envisage?
Well, I think we all in the climate movement live between this despair and hopefulness. And you look at what's going on in Australia,
Yeah, absolutely.
and you start to realise the challenge of environmental degradation and what is going to happen across the planet. I mean, some of that, there's not much we can do about it. We now need to have approaches that are going to enable us to adapt. But also on the other side, we have this enormous human ingenuity that can really drive different solutions that will, I think, pick up some of the momentum that's coming out of this extraordinary movement that's out there. And I think business responds to those kinds of signals. And the leaders and the winners of the future are the ones that are going to show that hopefulness and really respond to the opportunity that's out there.
James, thank you very much for your time.
My pleasure, Sumit. Great to chat to you.